It was a gray morning in March when Nicole Warren realized she had spent her entire life trying to prove herself, only to be overlooked by the people who were supposed to support her the most. She poured herself a cup of espresso, the bitter scent filling the small apartment she called home. For a moment, she watched the steam rise from the cup, feeling the warmth seep into her cold fingers. It was supposed to be a quiet, peaceful morning. She had just closed a major funding round for her biotech company and was looking forward to taking a break for the first time in weeks. But instead of peace, an unsettling sense of disconnection washed over her. The phone buzzed, pulling her out of her thoughts. It was a message from her dad. It had been months since they had really spoken, and even longer since they had exchanged anything meaningful. The message was short, but its message was clear: "Don't come home this year." She stared at the words on the screen, the same words that had haunted her in countless ways over the years. She thought she could ignore them, that they would fade away like everything else, but instead, they felt like a slap in the face. She had always been the quiet, diligent one. The one who worked tirelessly in the background, taking care of everything. But to them? She was nothing more than an afterthought, a footnote in the family's grand narrative. They never seemed to care about her successes. Her sacrifices, nothing, and now, on her mother's birthday of all days, the distance between them felt unbearable. What had happened to the family she once thought she could turn to? Why did they always choose her sister Claire, the beautiful, successful one, over her? Nicole had spent years trying to bridge the gap, but it seemed that no matter what she did, she would always remain in the shadow of someone else, and this time, her father's words confirmed what she had feared. She was no longer welcome. Nicole Warren was 32, a brilliant mind with a heart full of quiet ambition. She lived alone in a small apartment, nestled in the corner of a busy, growing city just outside of Boston. Her life was structured, meticulous. Every day began with the familiar ritual of making a cup of espresso, strong, rich, and calming. The aroma filled the room, grounding her as she prepared herself for another day in her world of science, numbers, and strategy. She was the co-founder of a successful biotech company, but in the eyes of her family, she was still the little girl they never understood. Her family had always seen her as the weird younger sister. The one who didn't like to party or show off. The one who buried herself in her work, letting her accomplishments speak for themselves. While her older sister, Claire, was always the one in the spotlight, beautiful, elegant, and effortlessly charming. Nicole found comfort in the background. She was the quiet one, often overshadowed by her sister's radiance. Growing up, it always felt like the world was watching Claire, while Nicole remained just out of view, waiting for her turn to be seen. Claire, on the other hand, had always been the golden child. She was everything their parents hoped for: a perfect daughter, never a hair out of place, always dressed impeccably, with a life that seemed effortless. To their parents, Claire was the one who deserved praise. Claire had the perfect life, the perfect job, and now, a perfect boyfriend. The kind of man who seemed to fit into their idea of success. A CFO, polished, intelligent, well-spoken, everything that Nicole was not, at least in their eyes. Nicole had always felt the weight of this comparison. She had worked so hard, and yet, nothing seemed to matter. Her accomplishments were always downplayed. She was the quiet one, the hard-working one, but it never earned her the love or recognition she so desperately wanted. No matter how much she gave, her time, her energy, her money, it was never enough, and yet, here she was, co-founding a biotech company, successfully navigating a complicated industry. But in the eyes of her family, it seemed all that mattered was whether she was polished enough to meet their standards. One cold late March morning, just a few days before her mother's birthday, Nicole's life took a sudden and painful turn. After months of grueling work and stress, she had finally closed a successful funding round for her biotech startup. It was a milestone, a sign that her hard work was paying off. Yet, as always, there was something pulling at her heartstrings, a feeling of emptiness when she thought about her family. Nicole had always tried to balance her personal life with the demands of her company. She planned to take a few days off to fly back home and help her parents prepare for her mother's birthday, as she did every year. It wasn't anything grand, it was just something she did to show her love, even if it was never fully acknowledged. She wanted to be there, to help in her own way. When she called her father to inform him of her plans, the conversation took an unexpected and painful turn. "Nicole," he said, his voice steady but distant. "If possible, don't come home this year." She was stunned, her mind racing for an explanation. Was he concerned about her busy schedule? Was he worried she might be too tired from work? She tried to reassure him, but his tone remained firm. "Claire is bringing her new boyfriend. He's a CFO, well-spoken, clearly successful. Your job? Well, it's hard to explain. You showing up would just invite comparisons and make things awkward. It's best if you stay." Nicole's heart dropped. Her breath caught in her throat as she tried to process what he was saying. "Are you saying I make the family look bad? That I shouldn't come home because I'm an embarrassment?" She asked, her voice strained with a mix of anger and disbelief. Her father didn't apologize or back down. Instead, he said coldly, "If you insist on coming, then don't call me your father." And with that, he hung up. Nicole sat there, her phone still pressed to her ear, her hands trembling as the silence of the conversation settled in. She stared at the wall, feeling as though the ground beneath her had vanished. She wasn't just excluded from the family gathering. She was being told, in the harshest terms, that her existence wasn't enough to be seen as worthy of inclusion. She didn't cry. There were no tears. Just an overwhelming numbness. For the first time, she realized she no longer had a place in the family she had worked so hard to hold together. The following days felt like a blur for Nicole. She didn't go to her mother's birthday, as her father had demanded. Instead, she stayed in her apartment, alone with her thoughts, as the silence in her life grew louder. The familiar routine of work kept her mind busy, but it couldn't fill the emptiness she felt inside. For years, Nicole had lived under the assumption that if she worked hard enough, kept her head down, and sacrificed enough for her family, one day they would see her. One day, they would acknowledge her achievements. But now, the truth was sinking in, nothing she had done mattered. She had been paying their bills, covering their costs, and yet, her existence had been nothing more than an inconvenience. It wasn't just the rejection from her father that hit her hardest. It was the realization that her role in the family had never been about love or respect. She was only valued when she was useful. When she could fix something or pay for something, they remembered her. But when it came to actual emotional support, she was invisible. That evening, while sitting alone in her apartment, she received a message from her mother. "Nicole, why is the power out? Can you check for us?" Nicole's heart clenched. There it was again. Another request. Another duty to fulfill. Her mother had never asked if she was okay. There was no "I'm sorry for what had happened." Just a simple demand, as if Nicole was nothing more than a service provider. This was the moment it all became clear. Her family had never really cared for her as a person. They had only cared about what she could do for them. She didn't reply to the message. She didn't make the phone call. For the first time, she refused to play the role they had assigned her. The following morning, she sat at her desk, staring at the screen of her computer. For the first time in years, she felt a sense of peace, not because she was relieved, but because she finally understood something important. Family wasn't just about the things you did for each other. It was about respect, love, and understanding. And for her, that had been missing all along. A few weeks later, things started to settle in Nicole's life. And she finally accepted that the void her family had left in her heart wasn't going to be filled by anyone else. At least, not by the people she had once hoped would recognize her sacrifices. She found solace in her work at Pacific Genomics, pouring herself into it with a renewed sense of purpose. One morning, as the autumn chill crept through the city, Nicole sat at her desk, sipping her espresso, going through her emails. The usual busy schedule had kept her mind occupied, but today there was a shift. An email caught her attention. It was a notification for a new employee transfer. She opened the attachment, scanning the names, and her eyes stopped at one, Liam Prescott. The name seemed oddly familiar. She'd heard it from her mother just a few days earlier, Claire's boyfriend, the one who was a successful CFO. Nicole barely gave him a second thought when her mother mentioned him at the time. But now, seeing his name in her inbox, her heart skipped a beat. Liam was transferring to Boston and would be reporting directly to her. The irony hit her hard. The man who had been introduced to her family as the perfect boyfriend, polished, established, charming, was now about to be her subordinate at work. It was almost too perfect. Life had a strange way of coming full circle. Nicole's thoughts immediately went back to that phone call with her father, the rejection, and the pain of being pushed aside for someone like Liam. She never expected to meet him under these circumstances, much less become his superior. But here it was, unfolding right before her. For a moment, Nicole felt a quiet sense of satisfaction. Her life had led her to this moment. She had worked so hard to build something on her own, only to have her family disregard it. But now, it was their turn to see what she had become. Nicole spent the next few days processing the reality of what she had just learned. She was still stunned by how things had shifted so quickly. As the CEO of Pacific Genomics, she had always maintained a professional distance, focusing on the growth of the company and keeping her personal life neatly tucked away. But now, Liam Prescott, her sister's boyfriend, was about to step into her office as one of her direct reports. The irony of it all wasn't lost on her. She sat in her office late one afternoon, long after the workday had ended. The office was quiet, with only the soft hum of the fluorescent lights above her. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, contemplating the email she had just sent confirming Liam's transfer to Boston. She knew the moment Liam walked through her office doors, there would be no turning back. There would be no pretending that their professional relationship wasn't tangled with the threads of her family drama. The next morning, Liam walked into her office. She could hear the sound of his polished shoes echoing in the hallway before he appeared at her door. His face was tense, his expression nervous as he stepped in, holding a folder. "Nicole?" Liam asked, his voice a mix of surprise and disbelief. Nicole looked up from her desk, her gaze calm. "Yes, Liam. Welcome to the team. I'll be reviewing the financial plan for this quarter." Liam stood still, his eyes widening. It was clear that this was the last thing he expected. The realization hit him hard. He wasn't just a guest at the family's Thanksgiving table anymore. He was now an employee, and not just any employee. He was reporting to the woman he had dismissed in his mind for so long. A tense silence filled the room. Liam looked at her, speechless, before he slowly took a seat and grabbed the contract she had prepared for him. Nicole didn't say anything else. She didn't need to. The truth had been laid bare. She watched as he left the room, his steps slow, his mind clearly racing. The rest of the day felt like a blur to Nicole. She went through the motions, meeting with investors, reviewing plans, and focusing on her usual tasks. But in the back of her mind, she couldn't shake the images of the phone call with her parents and the moments leading up to Liam's arrival in her office. The family she had once tried so hard to please, to be accepted by, had now been turned upside down. That evening, Nicole sat at her desk, staring at the pile of papers in front of her. The silence in her apartment was deafening. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to think about the choices she had made. Her phone buzzed with a message, breaking her thoughts. It was from her mother. "Nicole, I know yesterday got a little tense, but if you could take care of the internet bill that would be great. Claire is trying to keep things calm with the guests." Nicole's fingers trembled as she read the message. It was just another request. Another instance where her family expected her to clean up their mess without so much as an acknowledgement of her own struggles. No apology, no mention of the hurtful words her father had said. Just another demand. She set her phone down, her mind swirling. The cold reality of the situation settled in deeper. She had spent so much of her life trying to be the good daughter, the responsible one. But nothing had ever been enough. Not her success. Not her sacrifices, not her silence. All that had mattered to them was Claire, the golden child, the one who could do no wrong. The following day, Nicole received another message, this time from her sister, Claire. It was an angry voicemail, filled with frustration and desperation. "You knew all along, didn't you? You let it happen during the party. Mom's been crying all night. Liam doesn't even know how to react. You're so selfish." Nicole didn't bother to respond right away. She had nothing left to say. What could she say? That she was tired of being invisible? That her family had used her for years and now, when things finally started to fall apart, they wanted her to fix it. She didn't need to explain herself anymore. She had spent years trying to make them understand, to make them see her, but now, she realized that it wasn't her job to make them see her worth. It was their loss. A few days later, the phone buzzed again. It was another message from Claire. Nicole's finger hovered over the screen for a moment before she opened it. It was a short, sharp message. "Can you talk to Liam? He's misunderstanding everything." The familiar weight of responsibility crept in. Claire's relationship was crumbling, and once again, Nicole was the one being asked to step in. Nicole read the message again, her lips pressing into a thin line. It wasn't about fixing the situation, not truly. It was about saving face. About making everything look perfect in front of Liam, about making sure the family wasn't embarrassed. It was about keeping up appearances. For the first time in a long while, Nicole allowed herself to feel something close to anger. Not because of the request itself, but because it was the same pattern she had been trapped in for years. She had been their solution, their fixer, their backup plan. And now, here they were again, treating her like a lifeline, except, this time, it wasn't working. She typed a response, her fingers trembling slightly but with conviction. "Liam didn't leave because of anything I said. He left because of who you are." And maybe, for the first time, he really saw it. She read it over a few times, the weight of the words settling in her chest. Nicole paused before sending it. This was a turning point. It was the first time she was openly acknowledging the dynamic, the role her family had placed her in, and the damage it had done. It wasn't just about being the dutiful daughter anymore. It was about finally asserting herself and speaking the truth, even if it wasn't what anyone wanted to hear. She hit send. For the first time in years, Nicole felt something stirring inside of her, something she had buried beneath layers of duty and sacrifice. A sense of freedom. She didn't need to keep pretending, to keep fighting for validation from people who would never give it to her. She didn't have to be the one to fix everything. The silence that followed her message to Claire felt strangely comforting. It was the kind of silence that Nicole had never experienced before, free of the usual expectations, free of the usual demands. For years, her family had trained her to believe that silence was a sign of failure, that not responding, not fixing things, meant she had failed them. But this silence was different. This time, it wasn't a sign of submission, but of strength. The days that followed were heavy with the weight of what had transpired. Nicole didn't hear from her family immediately, and part of her was relieved. Her phone didn't buzz with requests for help. Nor did it light up with messages of anger or resentment. The world outside her family's expectations felt a little clearer, a little quieter, and for the first time in a long while, Nicole began to feel like she could breathe. But that silence wasn't to last. 3 days later, as she sat at her desk reviewing some reports, her phone buzzed once more. This time, it was a voicemail from her mother. Nicole hesitated for a moment before listening. The message, though brief, carried the familiar tone of desperation. "Nicole, please, it's about Claire, she's in tears. Could you just help us out this time? We can't manage without you." Nicole's stomach clenched. There it was again, her family's tendency to demand. To take without giving, to treat her like a solution instead of a person. Her mother's voice cracked with emotion, but it didn't evoke the sympathy it once had. Instead, it reminded Nicole of the years of sacrifice, of being there when no one else was. It was never enough. It would never be enough, but something inside her had changed. She couldn't go back to being that person. She couldn't let herself be used any longer. Nicole listened to the message, feeling the sting of old wounds. Yet, rather than feeling anger or guilt, she felt something else, a quiet resolve. She wasn't going to fix this. She wasn't going to step in. She wasn't going to be their fallback plan anymore. Instead, she hit the delete button. No reply. No more responses. This time, she would stay true to herself, no matter how uncomfortable it made everyone else. Later that day, she saw a message from her father, cold and curt, just as it always was. Nicole, please don't ignore us. We need you. But again, she chose silence. This was no longer her responsibility. She was no longer their fixer. A week passed in quiet peace. Nicole had returned to her usual routine at work, her focus entirely on her career. The chaos of family drama felt like a distant memory, pushed away by the strength of her own resolve. She no longer felt the constant need to prove herself, to carry the weight of other people's expectations. For the first time, she felt like she was in control of her own life, but life, as it often does, had other plans. One afternoon, as Nicole was heading home from the office, she received a message that caught her completely off guard. It was from Liam Prescott, the very same man who had once been her sister Claire's boyfriend, the man who had now, ironically, been assigned to work directly under her in the company. He had reached out to her before, but this message was different. It wasn't about work, nor was it about company matters. It was personal. Nicole, it began. I need to apologize. I never realized what was really going on, what had been happening between you and your family. After everything, I just wanted to say I admire your strength. I understand now why you've kept your distance. Nicole's heart skipped a beat. She hadn't expected an apology from him, of all people. Liam had been part of the problem, after all, a symbol of the life her family had tried so hard to maintain, a picture-perfect family for appearances, where Nicole's worth had been reduced to nothing more than financial support. But as she read Liam's message, she realized something. Maybe he wasn't just a product of the family's expectations. Maybe, in his own way, he had been trying to navigate the same pressure. In his eyes, she wasn't the difficult sister anymore. She wasn't the one who had to be hidden away in the shadows of Claire's perfection. Nicole sat down on her couch, staring at her phone, the words sinking in. Liam's words were different from everything she had ever heard from her family. There was no pity in his apology, no veiled blame. It was just an honest recognition of her struggles. And for once, someone had noticed. Someone had acknowledged her strength, not just as an employee, but as a person. Her thoughts were interrupted by another message, this time from her mother. The tone was different now, calmer, more subdued. Nicole, we need to talk. Your father and I, we've been thinking. We've made some mistakes, and we want to make things right. Nicole stared at the screen, her heart heavy. She hadn't expected this either. After everything, after the years of silence and rejection, here they were reaching out, trying to fix what had been broken. The familiar cycle of guilt and responsibility started to rear its head, but this time, Nicole was ready. She didn't need to rush into this conversation. She needed to stay firm in her decision. She replied simply, I'm not ready to have this conversation yet. I need more time. The days following Nicole's decision were filled with an unsettling stillness. She had finally built the life she wanted, the one where she was in control, where her worth was defined by her actions and achievements, not by family expectations or approval. Yet, the request from her family lingered in her mind like an unresolved question. They wanted to make amends, but could she trust their sincerity? Her relationship with them had always been transactional, doing things out of duty, rather than love. They had never truly seen her, not in the way she had always hoped. She had spent years, nearly her entire adult life, trying to earn their approval, but no matter what she did, it never seemed to be enough. The idea of opening up to them again, of allowing them back into her life, felt daunting. But at the same time, the thought of remaining forever distant also felt like a burden. Was it possible to forgive them without losing herself in the process? Could she rebuild those connections without falling back into old patterns? Nicole spent the next week reflecting, weighing her options. She focused on her work during the day, reviews, meetings, decisions, but in the evenings, when the quiet settled in, her thoughts wandered back to her family. The image of her mother's tired face, the voice of her father on the phone, the distance between her and her sister, it was all so much to carry. Then, one evening, as she sat at her desk, staring at the pile of work in front of her, she made a decision. It wasn't about whether or not she could forgive them. It was about whether or not she was willing to give herself the chance to feel loved again, even if that love came with complications. She realized that she didn't need them to see her as they had seen Claire, the perfect daughter. She didn't need them to apologize for everything. What she needed, more than anything, was to stop carrying their expectations. She needed to let go of the idea that her value was tied to their approval, and she needed to decide for herself what it meant to be loved. The next day, she called her mother. The conversation was brief but genuine, without the usual baggage. "Mom," Nicole said, her voice steady, "I'm willing to meet. But we need to do this differently. No expectations. Just a chance to talk." The meeting with her family wasn't easy, but it was necessary. Nicole had been prepared for a difficult conversation, yet the reality of sitting face to face with her parents after so many years of silence was overwhelming. They were older now, their faces etched with time, and the tension in the room was palpable. But as she looked at her mother's familiar, tired eyes and her father's hesitant expression, something inside her softened. Her mother, always the peacemaker, was the first to speak. "Nicole," she said, her voice shaky but genuine. "We know we've hurt you, and we can't take back what we've done. But we want to try, if you'll let us. We don't know how to start." Nicole sat still, her heart racing, but her mind was calm. This wasn't about forgiveness in the traditional sense, it wasn't about erasing the past. It was about acknowledging what had happened and allowing space for something different, a chance to heal, not just for her, but for them as well. "I've spent years trying to make you proud," Nicole said, her voice steady but laced with years of unresolved emotion. "And I've been angry for a long time. I've held on to that anger because I thought it was the only way to protect myself. But the truth is, I don't need your approval anymore. What I need is respect, not just from you, but from myself." Her father, who had been silent for most of the conversation, shifted in his seat. "I don't expect you to forgive us overnight," he said, his voice low. "But we've realized that we've been so focused on what we wanted from you that we never stopped to ask what you needed. And for that, I'm sorry." Nicole nodded, her throat tight. This wasn't a perfect resolution. This wasn't a fairy tale ending. But it was real. It was messy and complicated, but it was also a beginning. Over the next few weeks, their conversations became more frequent, more honest. Nicole didn't expect things to change overnight. But slowly, she could feel the weight lifting. She could feel herself stepping out of the shadow she had lived in for so long. Her family was still imperfect, still flawed, but they were trying. And for the first time, Nicole felt seen, not for what she had done for them, but for who she was. As Nicole sat at her desk in the office, the weight of her thoughts seemed lighter than ever before. She had made peace with her past, with her family, and now the future felt like it was full of possibilities. Her phone buzzed, breaking her focus, and when she glanced at the screen, it was an email notification from Liam. It was brief, just a few lines. "Nicole, I'm sorry about everything. I've been thinking a lot, and I need to make things right. I don't know where to begin, but I owe you more than an apology." Nicole sat there, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. She didn't need to respond right away. She had learned that in moments of clarity, it wasn't always the immediate reaction that mattered. But the action that followed, she decided to take the time to process it, not out of bitterness but because she had grown into someone who no longer needed to rush into decisions. The last few years had taught her that real growth came from taking a step back, observing, and then moving forward with intention. The days that followed were full of meetings, strategy sessions, and endless emails, but Nicole's focus had shifted. She realized that while her personal journey had been crucial, the work she did, the company she had helped build, needed to be the next chapter of her story. One afternoon, as she sat in the quiet of her office, a thought struck her: this was my calling. Not just for myself, but for others like me, those who had been overlooked, underestimated, or pushed aside because they didn't fit into society's narrow view of success. Nicole had always known she was capable of more than her family or society had allowed her to believe. But now, she was sure of it. It was time to step into the next phase of her career, not to prove a point, but because she had a purpose. She fired off a quick email to Liam. Let's meet. It's time to talk about what happens next. But I think you already know it's time for a change. Nicole stood up, stretched, and looked out the window. The city of Boston stretched before her, but for the first time, she didn't see it as a battleground. She saw it as a canvas, a place where she could create the future she had always wanted, the future that had once seemed impossible. The meeting with Liam was set for the following Thursday afternoon. Nicole arrived at the office early, eager but calm. The city outside her window felt like a distant memory now, as though the old Nicole, the one who had been constantly chasing approval, had faded away into the past. Now, in her own skin, she was ready to embrace whatever the future held. When Liam walked into the room, Nicole felt an odd sense of calm. The man who had once been just Claire's boyfriend, someone she had never expected to meet again in such a setting, now stood before her as a colleague, perhaps even a friend. Their eyes met, and for the first time, there was no judgment, no preconceived notions, just two professionals understanding each other in a way no one else had ever done before. Nicole, Liam greeted her, his voice soft but sincere. I think we both know why we're here, Nicole smiled, nodding. Yes, we do. But before we go any further, let's just be clear. I didn't do any of this to hurt anyone. But I'm not going to let the past control me anymore. Liam sat down, eyes locked with hers. I never wanted to hurt you, Nicole. I'm sorry it took me so long to see things clearly. It wasn't fair. Nicole took a deep breath, her heart steady. This moment was not about apology anymore, it was about change, and it was something both of them had to embrace if they were going to move forward. I appreciate your apology, Liam. But honestly, it's not about the past anymore. It's about what comes next. I've worked too hard for this, and I want to make sure that every person here understands that. We need to shift the culture. We need to make sure that everyone feels seen, not just because of the title they hold, but because of the work they do, the value they bring. There was a silence in the room as Liam processed her words. His eyes softened, understanding settling in. I want to be part of that change, Nicole. I know I'm not perfect, but I'll do whatever it takes. Nicole smiled again, this time with warmth. That's all I need to hear. They spent the next hour discussing what needed to be done. Together, they outlined new company initiatives focused on transparency, inclusivity, and personal accountability. It wasn't just about business anymore, it was about creating a culture where every person, no matter their background or position, felt valued. When the meeting ended, Nicole felt a sense of clarity and purpose she hadn't felt in years. It wasn't just about climbing to the top or seeking approval anymore. It was about leaving a legacy, one that truly reflected who she was and what she stood for. Later that evening, Nicole sat down at her desk, reflecting on everything that had led to this moment. She had once believed that her worth was tied to her family's approval. But now she knew better. Her worth came from her ability to stay true to herself, to take control of her narrative, and to build something meaningful from the ground up. And in that quiet moment, as the office lights flickered off around her, Nicole realized that the journey she had taken wasn't just about proving others wrong, it was about proving to herself that she was enough. She had become the woman she was always meant to be, and now, nothing could stop her from reaching the heights she was destined to reach. As the weeks went by, the changes in the company were noticeable. What had started as a quiet shift in Nicole's mindset became a ripple that spread across the entire organization. People began to speak up more in meetings. Employees who had once been afraid to voice their opinions, thinking their contributions didn't matter, now felt empowered to share their thoughts. Nicole's leadership was changing the dynamic. It wasn't about titles, positions, or expectations anymore. It was about people, about giving them the space to be themselves. The first major change was the initiative Nicole and Liam had worked on together, an employee well-being program. It wasn't just about perks and bonuses, it was about giving people the opportunity to speak freely, to express their needs and desires, to work in a space where they felt comfortable and valued. Nicole had always believed that productivity wasn't just about numbers. It was about fostering an environment where people felt seen. And now, she was seeing the fruits of her labor. There were moments of doubt, of course. The company had been built on a certain set of values that often prioritized results over relationships. But Nicole stuck to her vision, and slowly, the culture began to shift. People who had once been invisible were now becoming the backbone of the company. The quiet workers, the ones who kept everything running smoothly, were finally being given the respect they deserved. But change isn't always easy, and not everyone was happy with how things were evolving. There were whispers in the hallways, murmurs from higher-ups who had been used to the old way of doing things. They didn't understand what Nicole was trying to do, and some of them felt threatened by it. But Nicole had learned something crucial over the past few months. She didn't need to convince everyone. She just needed to stay true to her path. One day, while sitting in her office, Nicole received a message from Claire. Her phone buzzed with a text that seemed to appear out of nowhere, a message that caught her off guard, though, in retrospect, it shouldn't have. Nicole, we need to talk. Nicole stared at the message for a moment, her heart skipping a beat. It had been so long since she'd heard from Claire, since their last conversation, when everything had come to a head. After what had happened with her parents and the fallout from the birthday incident, Nicole had thought she had completely severed ties with her family. But now, here was Claire, reaching out. Nicole's mind raced. What could this mean? Was it an apology? Or was Claire simply looking to fix things for her own sake? With a deep breath, Nicole tapped the message open, her fingers trembling slightly. She read the text aloud, almost as if she were trying to make sense of it herself. I've been thinking a lot about everything that happened. I know it's been hard, but I need to ask for your help. There's something I can't handle alone. Nicole blinked, the words lingering in the air. This wasn't what she had expected. Not at all. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't a heartfelt attempt at reconciliation. It was another request, just like always. Another situation where Claire was in trouble, and Nicole was the one expected to fix it. Nicole felt the cold sting of the old pattern settling back in. This wasn't how it was supposed to be. She wasn't supposed to be the one who picked up the pieces every time Claire needed saving. She wasn't supposed to be the one to solve everyone else's problems, but Nicole had learned something important. She had learned that she wasn't the problem solver anymore. She wasn't the fixer. She wasn't the one who had to carry the weight of everyone's expectations. She had learned that her worth wasn't tied to her ability to constantly give. She set the phone down slowly. Her decision clear in her mind. She wasn't going to respond. She wasn't going to dive back into the role she had played for so long. This time, she was going to say no. This time, she was going to protect herself. That night, as the city buzzed below her apartment window, Nicole stood in front of the mirror. She looked at her reflection, at the woman who had fought so hard to get here. And for the first time, she smiled genuinely. Without doubt, her journey had not been easy. She had faced rejection, both from her family and from society, for simply being herself. But in that moment, Nicole realized she had everything she needed. She had her independence, her strength, and most importantly, her ability to stand up for herself. She was no longer the person who had to prove her worth to anyone. She had found her place in the world, and she had earned it. And for the first time, she truly understood what it meant to be free. The days that followed were quiet, but in that silence, something profound began to shift inside Nicole. The realization that she no longer needed to seek approval from her family, or anyone, for that matter, felt like a weight lifting off her shoulders. It wasn't just a change in how she approached her work, it was a complete transformation in how she saw herself. At work, the new culture Nicole had cultivated was flourishing. Employees who had once been hesitant to speak up now had their voices heard. Nicole's approach was clear: authenticity over conformity, empathy over efficiency, and respect for the individual over the role they were expected to play. She had fostered an environment that valued people, not just their output, and it was paying off, but Nicole's personal life was still a bit of a mess. While she had stopped seeking validation from her family, the truth was that the unresolved tensions with her parents and Claire still lingered in the background. That particular morning, her phone buzzed again. Another message from Claire: "Nicole, I'm really sorry for everything. Can we talk? Please." Nicole stared at the message for a while, unsure of what to do. For so long, she had waited for an apology from Claire, for her to finally recognize the hurt and the sacrifices Nicole had made. But this wasn't that message. This wasn't an acknowledgement of the years of neglect. No. This was Claire, yet again, reaching out for something. And Nicole knew that this time, it couldn't be the same. She couldn't let herself fall into the same pattern of doing everything for everyone else. She sighed deeply, placed her phone down, and walked to her office desk. Nicole knew what she had to do. It was time to stop playing the role of the savior in someone else's story. It was time to rewrite her own narrative. A few hours later, after a long day of meetings and work, Nicole found herself sitting alone in her apartment, reflecting on everything that had happened. She thought about her parents, how they had only reached out when they needed something, how they had once treated her as if she were invisible, like a piece of furniture in the background. She thought about the countless sacrifices she had made for them, and the lack of recognition, the lack of love. It was painful, but she was past it now. In a quiet moment, with the setting sun casting soft light through the window, Nicole made a decision. She would respond to Claire's message, but it wouldn't be what Claire was expecting. She picked up her phone and typed a short response, one that was final, but not cruel. "Claire, I'm sorry for how things have turned out between us, but I can't keep giving without receiving anything in return. I've done everything I could for this family, but I'm done. I've realized that my life and my happiness can't revolve around others' expectations anymore." It was firm, simple, but so much more powerful than any angry rant could have been. For the first time in a long time, Nicole felt like she was standing in her own power, making a decision for her future instead of living under the weight of past expectations. As the evening went on, Nicole felt a sense of peace. It wasn't about cutting her family out, it was about setting boundaries, about realizing her worth, and about choosing herself for the first time in her life. No more being the backup. No more being the one who was expected to give without receiving. She was done with that. Her phone buzzed again, this time, a message from her mother: "Nicole, your father is really upset with you. Why did you have to be so harsh? We're your family." Nicole paused for a moment. She felt a fleeting twinge of guilt. But as she looked around her apartment, at the life she had built for herself, the decision became clearer. Her family had always been the one to impose conditions. Now, it was her turn to set them. She didn't reply. Instead, she put the phone down and walked over to the window, staring out at the busy street below. The world was moving on. Her world was moving on. And for the first time, she wasn't trying to hold on to it, desperate for approval. She was letting it come to her, in its own time, and in its own way. Nicole had learned something invaluable through all of this, that sometimes standing firm doesn't require loud protests or dramatic gestures. It simply requires choosing yourself. She had spent years trying to fit herself into a box that her family had made for her. But now, she was free from those expectations. This is the lesson: we all have the power to redefine our relationships. We don't need to keep sacrificing our peace for the sake of others. True strength lies in knowing when to walk away and when to choose your own happiness. When we stop chasing approval, we make space for the life we deserve. Nicole wasn't just choosing herself, she was choosing a life of integrity, of self-love, and of respect. And sometimes, that's the hardest thing to do, but it's also the most freeing. The days after Nicole's decision were quiet, but they felt different. She had set a boundary, and it felt like the weight of the world had been lifted off her shoulders. Her mind, once constantly occupied by thoughts of her family and their demands, was now clear. Nicole found herself waking up earlier, not out of habit, but because she no longer felt exhausted by the invisible emotional labor she had been performing for so long. She was finally focusing on herself, on her work, on her passions, and, most importantly, on her own well-being. It wasn't that she had completely disconnected from her family, but rather that she had started to shift the way she saw her role in it. For years, she had been the one who gave, who showed up, no matter the cost. But now, Nicole was learning the art of choosing when to give and when to preserve herself. At work, her leadership had continued to thrive. She was not just seen as a co-founder but as someone who made decisions that changed lives. Pacific Genomics was growing faster than ever, and Nicole's quiet, yet firm leadership style had begun to attract more attention. She wasn't doing it for recognition, but the praise came anyway. She had built something real, something that wasn't based on a facade of perfection, but on authenticity and hard work. However, the silence from her family persisted. Claire continued to message her. But Nicole didn't respond to her emotional pleas. The messages were increasingly desperate, her mother occasionally chiming in with concern about how much Nicole had changed. But none of them understood the depth of what had happened. Nicole wasn't changing, she was simply becoming who she was always meant to be. They wanted her to keep playing a role, to keep being the person who quietly cleaned up their messes. But she couldn't do that anymore. One morning, several weeks after her decisive break, Nicole received a call from an unknown number. She hesitated before answering, wondering if this was just another one of her family members trying to get through to her. But it wasn't. It was Liam. The man who had once been her sister's boyfriend and now, unbeknownst to them, was working directly under her. "Nicole," Liam said, his voice sounding oddly distant. "I need to talk to you," she sighed but agreed, knowing there was no avoiding it. When he arrived, Nicole was calm but curious. Liam had always seemed polite, reserved even. But now, there was an air of discomfort about him. He sat down in the chair across from her, his hands fidgeting with the folder in front of him. Nicole knew something was off. "I don't know how to say this," Liam began, taking a deep breath. "But I have to apologize. I never knew the whole story. I never knew about everything you had to go through with your family. With the sacrifices you made. I guess I never really saw you for who you are." Nicole raised an eyebrow, wondering where this was going. Liam paused before continuing. "I always thought your family was perfect, but I realize now, I was blinded by their image. And I feel ashamed for how I treated you, especially after everything that happened with Claire. I see you now, for who you truly are, not just the sister, but the woman who has worked so hard to build something real." Nicole sat back in her chair, processing his words. She wasn't expecting an apology. She wasn't even expecting any acknowledgement from Liam. But hearing him speak, hearing him finally see her for who she truly was a turning point. "You know," Liam said, his voice softer now, "I've always admired your strength. Your ability to lead, your ability to stay calm in the face of everything. I've been working under you, and it's been eye-opening. I realize now that you've been carrying a weight that I couldn't even imagine. And I'm sorry for not seeing that sooner." Nicole didn't know what to say. She wasn't used to receiving validation like this, especially not from someone like Liam. But in this moment, she didn't need to say anything. His words were enough. "What do you want me to do?" she asked after a long pause, breaking the silence. Liam looked at her, a sheepish grin tugging at the corner of his mouth. "I just want you to know I see you. I'm not sure what that means, but I felt like I needed to say it." Nicole nodded slowly. She wasn't looking for validation from Liam, but hearing it felt like the last piece of the puzzle falling into place. She wasn't invisible anymore. Not to him, not to anyone. As Liam left her office that day, Nicole sat back in her chair, reflecting on everything that had led up to this moment. She had spent so long trying to prove herself to her family, to her colleagues, and to the world. But the real breakthrough had come when she had stopped trying to prove anything at all. She had stopped chasing approval, and in doing so, she had found her own peace. This was the real lesson: the power of not needing to be seen by others to know your worth. Nicole had spent years seeking approval, desperately trying to fit into the roles others had assigned her. But now, for the first time, she was truly free. She wasn't waiting for anyone to tell her she was enough, she already knew she was. Nicole's transformation was subtle, but in the weeks following her conversation with Liam, something inside her had changed. The quiet moments she used to dread, the ones filled with self-doubt and wondering if she was enough, became filled with calm clarity. She found herself waking up with a renewed sense of purpose. It wasn't about proving anyone wrong anymore, it was about building a life that felt true to herself. Her work at Pacific Genomics continued to flourish. Nicole's leadership had become a guiding force for the company. Her strategy and vision were reshaping the biotech landscape, and her approach, quiet yet decisive, earned her the respect of her colleagues. She wasn't trying to make waves. She was simply doing what she had always done, showing up with integrity and a relentless work ethic. But now, there was a difference. She was no longer hiding behind her work. She was no longer afraid of being seen. At home, things were quieter too. The phone no longer rang with demands or messages from her family. After the day her father had spoken those cutting words, everything had changed. Nicole had learned to let go of what she couldn't control. Her relationship with her parents and sister had shifted, but it wasn't all bad. For the first time, she wasn't carrying the burden of trying to make things right. She was focusing on her own well-being and progress, but every now and then, the old feelings crept back in. She would find herself thinking about her mother's voice, the hurt in her father's words, and Claire's cold indifference. She would catch herself wondering if things could have been different, if she had just tried a little harder. But every time those thoughts arose, Nicole remembered the power of silence. She remembered that she wasn't just a piece of their puzzle anymore, she was creating her own path. One evening, while sitting at her desk, Nicole received an email that brought her mind back to the present. It was from Claire. Subject: a request for help. Nicole sat for a moment, staring at the subject line. Claire had never reached out to her directly for anything, and the request felt almost foreign. Hesitant, Nicole clicked open the message. Nicole, I know we haven't spoken in a while, but I need your help. Liam is having a tough time adjusting to the move to Boston. He's not doing well with the change in his role. Can you talk to him? I think he needs someone to guide him through this. Nicole read the message again. The words seemed sincere, but beneath them, there was something else, something she couldn't quite place. Claire wasn't asking for a simple favor, she was asking for something bigger. It was almost as if she had forgotten everything that had happened between them, as if the years of distance had never existed. But Nicole wasn't sure if she could ignore that distance. She had spent so long trying to fix the cracks in their relationship, only to find that the only person who could fix her was herself. Nicole sighed. She had learned the hard way that giving too much of herself, too much of her heart, could leave her feeling drained and unappreciated. Yet here was Claire, asking for something she had never truly given Nicole before: trust. Later that night, as Nicole sat in her apartment sipping her tea, she couldn't help but reflect on how far she had come. The woman who had once thought she needed her family's approval to feel worthy was now someone who had learned to find that approval within herself. But as she thought about Claire's request, she realized that she didn't have to take on the role of the fixer again. She didn't have to be the person who always fixed things to make others comfortable. She could choose to help on her own terms, but only if it felt right. Nicole opened a new email to Claire. Subject: about Liam. Claire, I see that you're reaching out because you care about Liam's adjustment. But I want to be clear, I don't think I can offer him guidance the way you expect. What he needs is not someone to save him, but someone to understand him. I can offer that, but only if he's ready to accept it. I'll do what I can to help, but I won't carry the burden of your expectations. I've learned that much. Nicole paused for a moment, letting the weight of the message sink in before hitting send. For the first time in a long while, Nicole felt a sense of peace as she clicked send. She wasn't trying to fix the world. She was just living in it, carving out her own space where she didn't need to apologize for taking care of herself first. The next morning, as Nicole walked into the office, the familiar hum of activity greeted her. People greeted her with smiles, some stopping to ask for advice on their current projects, others sharing their excitement over upcoming developments. She had become a leader in every sense of the word, not just in title, but in the way she carried herself, and as she sat down at her desk. Surrounded by the people who respected her for who she was, Nicole knew one thing for sure: she had finally found her place. She had stopped trying to fit into a mold that was never meant for her. Instead, she had created her own. Months passed, and the relationship between Nicole and Claire slowly began to rebuild. There were still moments of tension, moments when the past reared its ugly head, but there was also growth. Nicole realized that the true healing came from accepting not just Claire's apology, but her own forgiveness of herself. She had spent so many years trying to be perfect in the eyes of her family, but she finally understood that true peace came from within. With each passing day, Nicole found herself becoming more involved with the people who truly valued her. Her work flourished, her company expanded, and she was now seen as a leader in the industry. She had cultivated a new kind of family. One that wasn't defined by blood, but by shared values and respect. As the seasons changed, Nicole's heart became lighter. She had stopped waiting for validation from her parents or from Claire. She had stopped letting other people's opinions of her shape the way she saw herself. She was now in control of her own story, and for the first time, she was free. It was a sunny afternoon when Nicole stood at her office window, looking out over the city she had come to love. The skyline of Boston seemed to stretch endlessly before her, and she realized just how far she had come. She no longer felt like the little sister trying to prove herself. She was a force in her own right, standing tall. With her own story to tell, that evening, Nicole received a call from Liam, her colleague and now a close friend. He had been with the company since the beginning, and their bond had grown over time. He had seen her struggle and had witnessed her triumphs. And now, he had an idea. "Nicole," he said, his voice excited. "I've been thinking. You've always been the quiet leader, but maybe it's time for you to step into the spotlight. What do you think about becoming the public face of Pacific Genomics?" Nicole paused. It wasn't something she had considered, but as she thought about it, she realized that it was time. It was time for her to take the reins fully, to no longer hide in the shadows of her own success. "I think it's time," she replied, a smile tugging at her lips. The next few months were filled with new challenges, but Nicole felt ready. She took on public speaking engagements, started mentoring young women in the industry, and became an advocate for women in STEM. Her story began to inspire others, and Nicole found herself surrounded by a community that believed in her and her vision. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about proving anything to anyone. It was about living her truth, about embracing who she had become and stepping into her power. One evening, as Nicole sat at her desk, preparing for another important meeting, she received a message. It was from her mother. "I know things have been hard between us," her mother wrote. "But I've been thinking a lot. I'm proud of you, Nicole. I hope one day we can talk, really talk." Nicole read the message, her heart swelling with a mixture of emotions. She didn't reply immediately. She didn't need to. What mattered was that she had found peace, not in the approval of others, but in her own self-worth. Moral of the story: the journey of healing is not linear, and it doesn't always look the way we expect it to. Sometimes, it takes stepping away from the people we love to realize our own worth. Our value is not defined by the expectations others place on us, but by the courage we have to live our truth. When we let go of the need for validation and embrace the power of self-acceptance, we find the strength to step into our future with confidence. End note. Nicole's story is a reminder that you are worthy of love, respect, and success, not because of what others think of you, but because of who you are at your core. Your journey is your own, and the only validation you need is your own. So, stand tall, live your truth, and never let anyone make you feel small. Your story is powerful, and it deserves to be heard.